What's up, everybody? I'm Stan, and welcome to Detail Comics, where we go over comics in detail. This is iRate Reviews, the show where I go over a comic book, its story, its art, give you my impressions, and let you know whether it's something to talk to the comic book shop about or not. So make sure to subscribe to get more of these every single week. The book I want to talk about is Venom Inc Alpha #1. So Venom Inc Alpha, written by Dan Slott and Mike Costa with art by Ryan Stegman, is telling the story of one of the most famous villains and anti-heroes in the history of Marvel, Venom himself. So in this book, we get the combined team of Peter Parker, Flash Thompson, and Eddie Brock taking on the Venom symbiote and the people that are looking to hunt it down. So let's dive in and see what the story's got. So as we jump into Venom Inc Alpha #1, we see that we're actually not dealing with Spider-Man or Venom at this point in time. We're actually dealing with an offshoot of Venom from the time of Flash Thompson as Venom and Agent Venom, and that is Mania, who is patrolling the streets of Philadelphia, taking care of the citizens of that city. She actually is kind of multitasking at this point in time, talking to Flash Thompson, going over what's going on, because he's just, he's a little distraught because he's lost his Venom symbiote. It's been stolen from him, evidently. Mania jumps right in, taking on these muggers that are trying to accost this woman on the street, as Flash Thompson continues to FaceTime with her, finally leaving them a little devastated. But the key is that as she's going to break up some other kind of robbery, she realizes this is a setup. The van door opens, the sonic blasters come out, and then all of a sudden Mania is sitting there on the ground. We see the combination of fire and sonics remove the symbiote from the young Andy, and then ultimately one person underneath this hood is looking to try on this Venom symbiote and become a Venom of their own. But that's only for so long. We go back to the Guggenheim Museum in New York City, where we see the Ringer and the Tumbler. So it's just one of those situations where these kooky kind of street-level villains for Spider-Man really kind of get to play a little bit bigger part, at least for a short period of time, as before we get this fantastic splash page from Ryan Stegman of Spider-Man. I mean, Stegman has got some history when it comes to the art of Spider-Man. He did Superior Spider-Man with Dan Slott for quite some time, so he has just got a knack and a grasp for this, so it's definitely something that I really appreciate on this kind of crossover. So as Spider-Man kind of wraps things up, quipping a little bit as he does so, he takes out both of these villains with one swift move, dealing kind of a tackle and kick at the same time, only to find out who the actual mastermind of this heist is, and that would be the Black Cat, as she is not necessarily prone to protecting the art while she's stealing it in order to get away. She knocks over what can be considered a priceless eyesore in Spider-Man's eyes, but is ultimately heavy enough that it gives Spider-Man some issues trying to get it off and get it back onto its pedestal as Black Cat kind of strolls away. So I feel like she might be playing a slightly larger part, or it's a great cameo as far as the series is concerned, because Stegman's take on Black Cat looks fantastic. And Peter gets a call from Flash, and they sit down to have a very detailed conversation regarding the future of the Venom symbiote and how Flash, well, he doesn't necessarily feel complete with it, and he's worried about what's going to happen to him and to other people without it. So Peter, being Spider-Man and not necessarily wanting to let on to those things to Flash, isn't necessarily in the same boat about saving the symbiote. He's more in line with destroying it, and that's going to play in a little bit later on. Immediately, we flash over to Eddie Brock as Venom as he takes on the looter who's transporting illegal firearms through New York City. It's toy guns? How are there toy guns kind of stashed inside this box? So he's basically wet himself, and then Venom, the symbiote, in this kind of rage-induced state, decides that it's much better to kill the looter instead of sending him to prison. He's a lot more valuable in that way, and that's when Eddie realizes that he is no longer in control. As he's tried to partner with this symbiote over the history of this current Venom run on the individual issues themselves, Eddie has been trying to medicate, and he's been trying to partner with the Venom symbiote, but ultimately the ruthlessness, the rage that was inside the symbiote that was kind of pacified by Flash Thompson in Venom Space Knight, in Guardians of the Galaxy, has really resurfaced at this point in time. So it's a matter of control. So this is where we see Eddie going to take desperate measures. He goes to Alchemex. He's looking for his medicine. We see Flash Thompson there. Everybody's kind of convening at the same space. Flash, using some of the training that he got on his way to being an Avenger, ultimately breaks in while we are followed by Spider-Man. We find that things get a little bit bit hairy. Eddie's not really appreciating the fact that these guys are screwing up on, their medical compositions for him. They're not following through on their end of the bargain. And ultimately what they did was they created these giant vats of cure that are based off of what, might actually kill a symbiote. They're using the elements of anti-venom. This is another thing that's pulled from Dan Slott's run earlier on in Spider-Man. And this is kind of exacerbated. The situation's made more tense as Flash Thompson comes in and is trying to reclaim the symbiote from Eddie Brock. And what we find is that Spider-Man, knowing that this is going to end poorly for everybody, jumps in, takes on the guards that were, nice enough to kick Flash Thompson out earlier, and makes his way trying to get to this fight, this fracas, before it ever really gets to a serious point. The Venom symbiote torn between its two hosts, wanting to be with Flash, knowing that he's with Eddie. It's just this kind of, this really tough decision for the symbiote that's been such an integral part of both of these lives, and they kind of split between them, causing this really disturbing 2-page splash scene where you've got nothing but symbiotes trying to encapsulate both of these men at the same time above the head of this scientist and of Spidey. So in a moment of desperation, he realizes there's a solution, literally a solution, sitting right next to him in the form of this kind of cure that's based off the anti-venom, taking matters into his own hands and feeling no remorse for, destruction of the symbiote that caused him so many issues, that created one of his worst villains in Eddie Brock's Venom. It's easy for him to make the decision to push over this giant tub, splashing it all over the Venom symbiote and creating what can only be described as a brand new anti-venom in the form of Flash Thompson. And you've got the Agent Venom look, you've got the Agent Venom feel. It's very much the white and the black, not the black and the white. It's, a pretty clear contrast to the previous versions of that, but it's a really interesting construct and concept that really pops in this book. As we kind of wind down the issue, we jump back to the looter who's kind of drowning his sorrows, understanding that he was defeated, and kind of smells like pee, and he's confronted by somebody else that's kind of offering him something he can't refuse. The spit flies from his face, and we see the beginnings of this new cabal of Venoms. So Venom Inc. really looks to be kind of a construct that is taking the concept of Venom and creating a team that are associated with this, almost like an infection, almost like a virus that is going to be playing out through these various people. So by breaking up the individual pieces of the Venom symbiote, they can kind of control and mastermind. This maniac is using what their knowledge of the Venom symbiote is and kind of moves it to really create a new way to commit crime and to partake in their particular style of villainy. So as far as a review on this book, I think that Dan Slott and Mike Costa did a very good job on it. I don't necessarily think that it's the strongest work that you can get out of Amazing Spider-Man, but it's definitely one of the best Venom stories that I've read recently, and I read all of Venomverse, which was very much a fun trip. I think that this integrates really well into the Amazing Spider-Man storyline. I think that the Maniac at the end looks a little bit like Lee Price, who was the original Venom host when Venom re-kicked off as far as Venom #1 a little while ago. I'm interested to see how this kind of goes, whether Eddie lost the actual symbiote entirely, or if it was just mostly reconstituted into the new Agent Anti-Venom that we see out of Flash Thompson. Either way, I'm happy to see Flash Thompson hosting a Venom symbiote, and I'm looking forward to where this goes. The only thing that kind of has me up in arms is I really like Ryan Stegman. Ryan Stegman's art when it comes to Spider-Man and Venom and these kind of things. I really enjoy that. There's a lot of history there, but I'm kind of concerned when it gets to the Venom books because that art style doesn't necessarily appeal to me so much because it's not Mark Bagley. Mark Bagley was doing the last few issues. He won't be doing this crossover. So we'll see what they're like when they come out. But that's my review for Venom Inc Alpha #1, and I want to know what you guys think too, so hit me up in the comments down below and we can start that conversation. As always, if you like what you see, hit the like button. Don't forget to subscribe to get more news, reviews, and commentary on comic books, comic book movies, comic book TV shows and games, and anything and everything inside the world of comics.